got it? Back up, back up, back up. Here we are, Ford. Back up. Feely, get back there with it. Get on your shoulders. What you got?
What you've got is virtual warfare in Marine fatigues. For months, Marine fire teams have been training at computer labs in Virginia, Georgia, and North Carolina, learning battlefield tactics and decision-making.
If they spend a whole lot of time doing that in an operating environment that's kind of confusing, noisy, like a real battlefield situation would be, then they'll be that much more effective as a unit in a real battlefield environment.
Everything from video games to cartoons have been used to smooth over and dress up the harsh reality of war, to the extent that people have and will continue to sign up for US wars under false pretenses. I'm going to explore this through the lens of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare from 2007 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare from 2019. Let me explain. When you see imagery like this, we often think, how could people buy into such blatantly obvious propaganda? Yet, I'm going to argue that this still happens today. How though? We live in the most interconnected time in human history. At any moment you can access a video taken anywhere across the globe, and in your pocket you have a device which can research and learn practically every piece of knowledge ever available. Yet what we see is still controlled. After the recent October 7th attacks by Hamas, a video was distributed by Israeli journalists in which 1,200 Israelis were killed. The video was shown to a select group of journalists and politicians around the world, yet only 1 minute of this has been released to the public. Why, in a world so full of freedom of information, would we not be able to see the realities of the war front? In the most interconnected era of human history, what we see is still watered down and filtered. What does this have to do with the Call of Duty series though? A fictional series in which you can ride around on a snowmobile whilst holding 2 rifles and picking up enemy bullets as you tear through their base. What does this have to do with propaganda? Let's talk about it.
Yet to die, 27 seconds in the hill, a 5-0 start.
New video game actually allows
Call of Duty.
you to be a
Call of
terrorist
Duty
and
Black
kill
Ops.
people.
In his book From Sun Tzu to Xbox, Ed Halter wrote, "The technologies that shape our culture have always been pushed forward by war. Video games were not created directly for military purposes, they arose out of an intellectual environment whose existence was entirely predicated on defense research." Now, I'm not going to be saying that Call of Duty has been funded by the United States Department of Defense, because unlike the multitude of films that have, there is no official funding of the Call of Duty series in the same vein as the full Spectrum Warrior series is. However, the Call of Duty series has worked in the benefit of the US military. In a 2015 report, the Pentagon included video games as a tool that can be used to benefit military service recruiting and retention programs. The iconography used in these games has the effect of subconsciously influencing the zeitgeist of what really happened in the war. In Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the narrative centers around a radical leader in an unnamed Middle Eastern country, Imran Zakhaev, the antagonist, clearly representing the Saddam Hussein boogeyman that haunted the US during the Iraq War.
I take the threat very seriously. I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously.
This, in fact, was not true about Saddam Hussein. And merely 3 years later, George Bush claimed that there was no reason to go into Iraq.
And it is true that much of the intelligence turned out to be wrong. As president, I'm responsible for the decision to go into Iraq.
In the narrative of this game, the unnamed Middle Eastern country's radical leader does in fact possess nuclear weapons, and thus the protagonist's efforts to thwart him are justified. This again acts to rewrite history, leaving the player with the feeling of accomplishment and justification for invading the Middle Eastern country. In Matthew Thomas Payne's book, Playing War, in a chapter titled The First Personal Shooter, Payne argues that post 9/11 military shooters were and remain marketplace successes because their photorealistic visuals and immersive stories sync with what producers and players believe combat to look and feel like. Due to the first-person perspective of these games, people are more likely to be immersed in the worlds from a psychological perspective, not seeing what the protagonist is doing from a neutral perspective, but seeing the same thing that they see. Thus, discrepancies about the narratives of real-life wars will have more influence over people into rewriting history of the real atrocities that the US committed. This happens again in Modern Warfare 2019. The real tragedy, called the Highway of Death, is alluded to in the game. A similarly bombarded road in the fictional Middle Eastern country of Urzikstan is named the Highway of Death. In Modern Warfare, Russia is responsible for the Highway of Death, when in reality it was the US who bombed and killed over 100 innocent people. There's much debate whether this could be considered a war crime, but in Call of Duty, it is not the US's fault. Call of Duty as a series has never been rated anything less than 18 or M, aside from the first 3 titles being rated teen. Thus, people would argue that an 18-year-old has the cognitive ability to separate between fact and fiction and will have access to the internet to research the truth of these scenarios. But, as we know, it's very easy to get around the ratings board, with a large proportion of people who play these games being children. The Department of Defense has given away prizes on Twitch to children aged as young as 12 on Call of Duty streams on the US Army's official Twitch page. This again isn't me claiming that Call of Duty has been a propaganda tool. However, I do think that when people play these games growing up, they will feel as though war is not as bleak and as harsh as it truly is. People may be encouraged to join because they like playing in these simulated realistic environments, but a video game will never truly capture the actual experience of war, despite what the army tries to tell you.
Go. Alright, to the left.
You look like you're really into this. You guys want a real challenge?
As a soldier in the United States Army, you'll find out what you're really made of and how far you can go.
Yet the US Army still uses video games to try and recruit people into willingly signing up for war. This isn't limited to the US though. In 2019, the British Army rolled out a horrific advertising campaign, calling out millennials, snowflakes, and more importantly to this argument, binge gamers. The Call of Duty games themselves strive for realism and pay for the rights to model their video game weapons on the real weapons and vehicles that modern armies use. This again tricks your brain into imagining that these things are just as fun, if not more fun, to play with in real life. This leads people to become indulged into gun culture and eventually choose to enlist in order to be sent to play with guns in real life. In reality, this couldn't be further from the truth, leaving soldiers shell-shocked when they find out the realities of war. In Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the key problem is the glorification of the individual soldier, epitomised by the player-controlled character Soap McTavish. The game places players in the shoes of the elite soldiers engaged in high-stakes missions, creating a sense of empowerment and heroism. The intense focus on individual heroics can serve to distract players from the broader consequences of war, emphasising the tactical and personal victories rather than the systematic impact on societies. Furthermore, the game's emphasis on fast-paced action and set-piece moments may contribute to desensitising players to the gravity of war. The relentless onslaught of adrenaline-pumping sequences may inadvertently overshadow the more sombre aspects of conflict, reducing war to a series of thrilling encounters rather than a complex socio-political phenomenon with profound consequences. Game developers know this, and know that players don't want to sit in silence and think about the potential war crimes that they have committed, and in the attention economy of video games, if you don't give your players enough action, they won't keep playing, and more importantly, they won't keep paying. A game that does do this well is Spec Ops: The Line. The 2012 game takes a critical and anti-war approach to its narrative. It does not glorify war, rather it seeks to explore the psychological and moral consequences of warfare. As players progress, they are confronted with difficult decisions and moral ambiguity, challenging traditional notions of heroism in video games. This provides players with a much more thought-provoking experience that questions the nature of war and its consequences. It does not romanticize or glorify the violence inherent in war, but rather encourages players to reflect on the cost of conflict and the choices made in the heat of battle. The same can't be said for Call of Duty. While Spec Ops: The Line takes a third-person perspective, allowing you to see the actions of your character, Call of Duty has you play from their perspective, making it feel as though their decisions are your decisions. Thus, when a game ends with the victorious killing of a terrorist leader, you feel as though your actions have been justified. This in turn smooths over the reality of war and rewrites history within your head, ignoring the truth. Thanks for watching.